Okay, before I dive into the mire of these questions from the U.S., as people know, in addition to the fact that many people here in the United States look to these webcasts and look to what Mr. LaRouche has to say as critical in helping them discern a reasonable path for themselves and for their constituents in this current period of grave crisis. It is also the case that there are many people around the world who look to Lynn in an effort to understand what would otherwise seem to be a rather insane situation inside the United States. And today, we're very honored to have one of those people here, and I understand he does have a question. He has asked questions via the internet at previous events, but I'd like to ask him to come up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the deputy editor of the Zavtra Weekly in Russia, Mr. Alexander Nagorny.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to pose a question. But personally, I would pose 100 questions to Mr. LaRouche. Mr. LaRouche is very famous, especially in intellectual groups in Russia, and of course, his ideas, one way or another, they penetrate into different countries. And my question would be rather, I would say, complex, because the latest elections showed that in the United States there is a rising resentment towards the current situation and current political leadership. But we cannot say that those elections gave some hope for the future, because one way or another they show more reactionary results. And if we stem from the situation in the States and the election campaign, we will see that the British connection is always there, and it always used the crisis circumstances to prepare another circle of war. How would Mr. LaRouche connect those things? Don't you think that if the crisis deepens in the United States in connection with the Federal Reserve System and all other things which you mentioned, that those circles could prepare a war first, say, in Iran, and with a strategic goal to arrange the war between China, which actually is carrying out the more LaRouche type policy, and the other countries? Thank you.
Yes, there is a danger of that sort of warfare. It's really quite probable under the conditions of which what I proposed be done, not done. I would say what the inclination would be, for example, in the United States, that the United States is the key to all of this thing. If the United States does not do what I know it should do, if it tries to compromise internally between the leadership of the Democratic Party, or what I would consider the core of that leadership, of the valuable core of that leadership, and the Republican Party, especially the fascist wing of the Republican Party now, I think the world would go down to hell. But the hell would take many forms. It would take, obviously, the form of local warfare. It would be a new wave of warfare, worse. It would be like the European crisis in the Dark Ages. The planet as a whole would go into a dark age, which would probably be characterized by all kinds of local killing and warfare, chaos. Because all that holds the world together is the degree of cooperation. We cannot maintain the population of this world without cooperation around some common principle of development of nation states. We just are not going to have the means to maintain populations. When you get into this kind of extremely negative development, as we've seen in the dark age of the 14th century Europe, that would be the kind of situation, but on an augmented scale, we could expect if we don't succeed in ending this process now. So therefore, it's important that leaders of nations who have the guts, as we say, to take a strong stand on behalf of seeking cooperation among nations, among forces among nations, which will work together to prevent this process. I don't think we have a chance. I think chaos is here. If we can find forces in various nations, effectively key nations, for example, we have the case of Russia, China, India. These are key nations together with the United States. If you have cooperation among these nations, if that's possible, then you will automatically have cooperation with Korea. Japan is obviously going to cooperate, and other nations are going to cooperate. Europe, Germany will tend to try to come back into some kind of relationship to this. Some things in Northern Italy might work out. Some people in France would like it. But it will be a hellish situation. And therefore, if the United States does not, I see the United States as having the greatest responsibility for this situation, because if we do not do what we could do as a leading nation, and if we do not bring other nations to a common table with us on these kinds of conceptions and policies, we're not going to make it. This planet's going to a dark age. And what we've seen since the fall of the wall in Germany, the kind of chaos which the British and French, Mitterrand, and the United States with H.W. Bush brought into being, will be the characteristics throughout the world, that kind of chaos. So we are at a point where we have to, first of all, accept the challenge of preventing this chaos from happening. And we can only do that by coming to an agreement on policies of agreement, on development, which create stabilizing conditions. If we can create conditions under which people believe that in their governments there's a way upward available to them now, even if it's not perfect, but if it's a way up, we can stabilize the planet if we have good leadership on key nations. And I think there is that possibility. What I said today, earlier, is when talking about the U.S. internal negotiations now, which are going on, will be going on this week. There'll be very intensive negotiations among the parties this week, the party leaderships. And if the right attitude is taken, if a firm position is not taken against what Rand Paul represents in the United States, then the whole world is going to go to hell. And that I can predict with certainty. Because if the United States goes into hell, the consequence will be the whole world go to hell. The British can't make it. Some of the smarter British admit it. But they don't do much about it, apparently. But they were headed toward hell right now. And therefore, that is the issue. We must find the solution. We must establish that solution. I believe it's reasonable. I believe it can be done. I believe there's a will among forces, among nations to do it. But we have to achieve it. We just cannot talk about it. We have to achieve it, actually.